My name is Sam. I'm on the Voiceflow team, and I host this Expert Conversations workshop series where I bring in experts across the conversational AI space to hopefully share some insight and knowledge with everyone else. And that expert today is the one and only Brian Smith. Brian, thanks for being here today. Excited to have you talk on this topic.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Sam. Like Sam said, I'm Brian Smith. I currently work at Intuit as a senior product manager, focused on our conversational AI and digital assistant products. I've been in the conversational AI space for about 4 years. 4 years now. I actually started in marketing, building marketing campaigns for several of our partners at my prior company. Transitioned quickly into product management, and then found my way into conversational AI within product management. And so I've been here for the last 4 years. I've worked in insurance, financial services, software, and tech. And my role has kind of spanned across several different facets. I think probably several people on the call, if you're in this space, you know that you kind of flex into other different areas just because the space is so new and roles are not created yet. So I have played, the role of a conversation designer, the PM, architecting behind the scenes for new feature capabilities, as well as our user experience design. So kind of have a breadth of exposure in the space, but primarily focus on PM work right now.
Absolutely. So speaking of the roles, I think this next slide does very well at illustrating that role and how you fit and how a product manager fit in general within the conversational AI space, because everyone's doing it differently. Why don't you give us a little bit of context here?
Yeah, so this slide just shows very high level kind of the various different teams that I work with. So the black bubble there would represent me as the product manager for the digital assistant capability. We have various business units that we work with. So at Intuit, it's TurboTax, QuickBooks, Mailchimp, Credit Karma, Mint. And within those business units, they have various different teams. So there's product teams, there's experience owners that own the actual experience that's delivered. And then conversation designers sit in the business unit. So we're kind of highly matrixed. When we work with the business units, it's really around deploying the digital assistant into their product. They own the content, and then I kind of drive the features and capabilities of the platform. So what's a little different here is a lot of companies go with external vendors to support their chatbot. We actually built ours in-house, and so I kind of play the role as that vendor. And then my team on the other side, when you start to look at like product development, they're really focused on how do we start to scale capabilities, make it easier for people to use our platform internally. UX design is really around the UI of the actual chatbot, not the UI of the actual content. So as content designers are creating, what the bot will say, how does that surface up in the actual bot? Could also be visualizations, different things like that. And then we have an analytics arm. Obviously other PMs, because you have to influence across when you have dependencies on other areas. And then we do a lot of research. Some of the research we've recently done is, how much humanization is too much humanization, and how does humanization relate to trust, levels of trust with an automated system. So a lot of what we do is like, we call it provocations, but prototyping, experiential things and then scaling back to figure out how we can start to deliver them. And then it becomes kind of a feature that these business units can then deploy into their products.
Do you find yourself needing to kind of level up and educate other product managers who aren't privy to conversational AI per se, but like are product managing a certain UI or UX feature, for example, on a different business unit?
Yeah, I think the biggest struggle right now in the space is, and I had dinner with Tara and Brayden the other day, and we talked about this a little bit. Like a lot of, I was sharing that I'm trying to push more so around conversational AI in a product versus just the traditional digital assistants that you see, that appear when you click a help button or a floating action button, and they open up a right rail or something pops up. Like, how do you start to think outside of that aspect and deploy different types of experiences? And Braden was like, Brian, that's great, but companies are just trying to get a bot on their site at this point in time. So I think as we start to explore those with different teams, like in TurboTax, for example, a lot of people, I would say, are hesitant to automate certain things, are hesitant to bring in bots in certain situations. I'm not sure where the hesitancy comes, but oftentimes we try to challenge different pieces of the experience to show wins. And then that kind of proves, the proof is in the data and what shows in terms of performance, right? So I think there's oftentimes pushback a little bit, which comes with anything that you're trying to drive in a corporate setting. But yeah, I think trying to move from this traditional chatbot to something that's a little larger, and thinking outside of the box has I definitely pushed people outside of their comfort zone. I will say that.
On that note, then, speaking of like what you're thinking about today, obviously you touched a little bit on this mindset shift. Why don't you talk about you as a PM? What are you thinking about, and maybe some ideas that other PMs can take from this?
Yeah, so obviously this list is probably much larger, but I kind of just leveled it up to these 4 here that you see, and I'll hit one at a time. So the first one is on being global ready and localization. So we have bots all around the world. We have conversation designers that are in different markets like Australia, France, the UK, Canada, Mexico, the US, obviously. And so as we build out new features and we build out new types of experiences that could be scaled towards multiple digital assistants, making sure we take into localization. An example here is in the US, we have social security number, but in other countries, they don't use that. And so if we build some type of feature that requires that, how do we shift to know which bot is calling into this feature and be able to shift based on the locale or the market that's calling into it? Another example is routing number for your bank. In Australia, they call it BSB. In other markets, they don't use routing number. And so how do you start to scale to offer a single type of experience, but then it shifts based on the locale that you're in. Oftentimes here we pick one bot to deliver something in to basically proof of concept. And then once it's there, then we make it global ready to be scaled towards all the other DAs. The ease of use through automation, a lot of here is like content designers, conversation designers are really good at writing the content. They're really good at bringing out the bot persona and the tone of voice for their given product lines. But sometimes that requires a lot of rules to be written behind the scenes, variables to be onboarded, different things to personalize the experience. And so some stuff that I think about a lot is like, how do we make it easy for them to just focus on the content? And the way it gets surfaced up is, triggered through some type of system or something behind the scenes, right? Through automation. The third piece is around challenging mindsets, and we'll get into this a little bit later in this deck, but around thinking outside of just using the traditional form-based experiences you see. So today in the industry, we see a lot of button-based experiences, suggestion pills or chips, whatever you want to call them, to help customers get down to resolution. And so starting to think, how do we challenge that mindset and try to think outside of the box? And we've done some stuff internally here that has really helped us understand what gaps do we have in the current architecture to be able to build out new capabilities that would allow us to do more things that make the conversation feel humanized. And then the last part is future state vision, which kind of ties into some of the next slides too, is really around how do you sell the vision of where you want to take this product as a product manager, or if you're just a conversation designer with no PM and you're focused on the overall experience, how do you start to sell the vision of how we start to scale from just FAQs or being able to complete something to really driving towards what I call conversational AI, where this thing is forming insights and doing stuff on your behalf and proactively engaging you and persisting in the conversation. Those types of things. How do you start to share, that vision? And so we kind of worked with all of the business units to pull together horizons. So we have 3 horizons on where we want to take this program. And so it really helps to kind of paint the picture when you speak more so about the customer journey and the customer experience. instead of just like ability to statements. And so being able to paint, we want the bot to be able to do X, Y, and Z when customers do this. So really talking about like features of the experience.
Yeah, and I do think that Horizons worksheet per se is going to be very valuable for other PMs or even just teams to look at, because I think sometimes it's hard to see the forest for the trees when you're like, well, we know we want the bot to be better, but it's hard to externalize that. And I think, like you say, PMs hold a lot of that responsibility for highly successful teams. So I think that'll be a great framework. Let's go look at some of your tips now. So we talked about what you're thinking about. I think these evergreen tips are going to be incredibly useful for any PM in day-to-day.
Yeah, I think these are things that I try to share with anyone that's working at Intuit in this space. Intuit's really big on designing customer experiences using human-centered design, doing a lot of rapid prototyping and rapid experimentation. So what we do is we do a lot of A/B tests. We do a lot of stuff that it kind of ties in the second one. I think oftentimes we try to put stuff out that's kind of MVP ready. But my goal is to have these teams put stuff out that would break the bot or would break the experience, so we can start to get learnings. We do fail often, I would say, but we get learnings and we quickly shift and deliver things that make the most sense for our customers. Rapid experimentation is really around getting something in front of your customers and getting feedback in real time and shifting your design or your experiment before going to the next subset of customers. So being able to rapidly change based on feedback to get down to something that makes the most sense. The third one is really around like live in the day to day. Be grounded in what you're working towards today, but also make time to spread the word of like quick wins and things. I think oftentimes within the PM space, like it's always go, go, go. And there's not a lot of time to kind of bring yourself above the water and show all of the great work and all the big wins and which helps paint the picture of why we should be continuing to fund and build out this space with whatever company that you're at. And then the last piece is I hit on earlier, Horizons kind of help paint that journey. So it helps have a single snapshot if it's one slide that shows 3 or 4 horizons, however many you think makes the most sense, but be able to start to paint the picture of what you want the customer journey to be. And then you can kind of double click into each of those and try to figure out, what makes the most sense in terms of capabilities or experiences or things we need to build out.
Yeah. For me, number 3 was I resonated with the most, just because I think you self-identified that like it's very hard to sometimes get your head above water and say, hey, C-suite, hey, other PMs, hey, other business units, look at the work we're doing in a packaged way. And I think, this helps move conversational AI along more almost equal to any other innovation, right? It's just that constant spreading of the word. So I love that one. So let's talk about that you mentioned Horizons a couple times. So let's do an example of that Horizon worksheet then.
Yeah, I think like this is very high level, but I think the way bots are designed today is more they started as more informational. So it's like, how can we answer the top questions that people are calling in about? So there's a limited subset of intents. I think this is kind of what we saw during COVID when people started deploying bots everywhere. It's like, what are the top things we can get towards resolution so they don't contact a human? And now we're starting to kind of see the space move towards transactional or do it for me type of experiences. So how can the bot start to help complete tasks, whether on your behalf, orchestrating something behind the scenes, helping you with simple types of things. I think oftentimes we see it's moving towards the chatbot space, but we've seen it in the IVR space more often when people need some type of document or thing. And then the last piece is conversational. So this is kind of what I was hinting at earlier around there could be a goal for your team to create a bot that is fully supportive wherever you're at in a digital experience. And how does that bot get surfaced up when there's different insights or actions the customer needs to take, and can it do stuff on your behalf? And I think what also helps when you start to look at these different categories is identifying what the bot does and what the bot doesn't do. because that can help you start to refine when business units or different product managers come to a design team and say, hey, we want to build this out. You can have a document that says, well, the bot doesn't do that because X, Y, and Z. The bot does this, right? So whatever those principles are, I don't think there's a well-defined list today in the industry. I think everybody is just based on what their customers need, but we're starting to do that at Intuit to start to put some framework around, like, digital assistants will do X, Y, and Z. They won't do an example. They won't make changes to your tax return, right? That gets into legal stuff, and so the bot will never change Brian Smith's numbers on his tax return. It might help him upload a document to get started, but it won't make adjustments to that. So there's different things there that we're starting to put into play as well.
Yeah. That's very interesting, because I think so many people are pushing this scale to be like, get to conversational AI, open-ended conversations, anything is possible, right? That's great, but that doesn't mean the bot should do anything as possible, even when you get there, right? So along the way, kind of self-checking as a PM, as a designer, whoever, about like, hey, what is the true goal and purpose of this bot on this specific part of the customer journey, right? Because you can have different bots, right, to satisfy different levels of complexity. But that's a great call out, right? Just because you're moving along innovatively doesn't mean you have to be innovative for every step of the customer journey too.
Yeah, exactly. And do you need one bot? Do you have child bots that are micro smart that you hand off to that have their own NLU? Do you have specific ones to a given product? Like, what's the scope and how do you align? Because as you start to add more conversations to a singular bot across multiple product lines, some things mean different things across. For example, banking and insurance could have the same type of NLU. Grammar, that means two different things. And how do you disambiguate if it's the same bot, for example? So even exploring things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So let's go into an actual example, as you mentioned here. Just the idea of rethinking good conversational AI. So walk us through what we're looking at here.
So there's like this notion of clickstream data. So being able to have some type of data from your product that tells you what the customer has done. So in this example here, very high level, maybe it tells us the last 3 pages the user has opened up, and so then the bot gets invoked, and we present some type of personalized welcome greeting that has those 3 types of intents that are mapped to whatever output is provided there. So in the traditional sense, you would have somebody come in and say, hey, here are some things that might be relevant to you, and we have buttons that provide some type of action. So in this case, the customer wants to make a reservation. We don't wait for the customer to say what they need. We offer up some type of proactive suggestions, and then we get them right to resolution. What I'm starting to push the teams to think about is using the same type of data. How do we have high probability to start with maybe the top intent to make it feel a little more personalized? So if you come into the experience, maybe we have some type of dynamic variable that's ported in. So making a reservation would be the highest level intent. And then you would have yes or no, leading with open-ended prompts, adding visualization to make the experience feel a little more humanized and fun. I think because the words are kind of the interface today, how do we start to couple them with some visuals? The only thing that's difficult here is, like, you have to attribute yes to whatever the dynamic variable intent is displayed, because the bot doesn't know that it's pulling in making a reservation. So there is some complexity here on the on the PD side to be able to build out some type of functionality like that. But starting to think of how do we get out of just the traditional question answer. Here's some buttons, click a link, I navigate out, to really drive, I can help you book a reservation, and go down that path in the bot if a customer chooses that option.
And that's another example of actually simplicity improving the experience of the bot, right? Of doing the work on the back end, letting the designer focus on designing and being creative within the context that's helpful to the customer, versus let's level any and all opportunities to this customer just because we want to overshare and then over ask, right? That's fine design, right? Because you're doing more than just having a landing page or a mobile app, right? But there's a lot more that can be done here, and a PM can push that along, that innovation along.
Yeah, I think the struggle that we see right now is like, because digital assistants have been painted as this like containment is the only metric, interaction rate, like how many intents are we answering, that oftentimes when you open up a bot, I mean, if you go to any of our bots at Intuit, you can see this, right? Like we're trying to make sure that we're answering the customer's questions and getting to resolution. And so sometimes you might get an experience, I call it vomiting on the customer, but it's literally like 5 message bubbles that appear, and each one is like, hey Sam, I'm the so-and-so bot here to help answer all of your questions. You can also escalate to a human if you want. Here's 3 things that might be relevant to you. Also, my new features are down here. So you've given the customer like these 18 different things that they could do, which is great, like, right, choose your path, whatever you want. But some of the stuff that we're trying to build is around making sure that we offer up the best initial experience for the customer, based on whatever criteria they meet. And so being able to lead with more personalized, humanized experiences. In the same way, when you call into a contact center and the rep says, hey Brian, thanks for calling, whatever, how can I help you today? Obviously there's probably context sometimes passed through, but if there's not, like, they leave it open-ended and they ask for you to answer them. And so how do you start to bring that kind of human aspect into these designs?
Yeah, human, because that's actually how we have conversations, right? And I think that's, if brands can get closer to that, obviously you're going to trust them, you're going to want to be loyal to them, and you're going to want to take their advice as word versus be skeptical and need to be leveled to a human at every turn, right?
Yeah, I see a comment in the chat, like overloading customers, right? Like how much are you putting on the customer in terms of cognitive load, and making them read all of this, because you give them all of that information, and you've kind of you might upset them. They might not feel like that's a good experience, or they might see like, oh, this is just an automated bot. Whereas maybe you do an experiment and you say, what if we just open-ended prompted the customer and ask them, what do you need help with? And see what they say, because I've done some tests in previous life, and it's very interesting when you leave it open-ended. Some customers will type tons of text, some won't. But as you start to shift the experience from the traditional bot design that we see to more open-ended, customers don't type in one word utterances. They're typing in a sentence or two. They're talking back to you as if you're messaging them. It's interesting how the design can shift the way the customer interacts.
Absolutely. And I think and we've talked about it too, and when we were prepping for this, it's just like actually testing and building on real NLU data, based on what the customer is saying, actually makes the designer so much more deadly with a good design, because then they can actually build the experience around what customers are saying in production and have that workflow loop get closed. And a PM obviously is in charge of making sure that data makes its way back to the design to influence it, right? Speaking of that, to wrap, I guess, this section, we're going to move into a little bit of a working in Voiceflow. Brian and I kind of built out a little bit of a workflow demo of how a PM and a designer, for example, might work. Just with a few key features that we wanted to level, that obviously are, that we find important in a PM's workflow today, that especially when it comes to collaborating. So we built a little bit of a reservation assistant, as you saw in this demo here. Thanks for coming, Rebecca. Saw your comment. We'll send a recording of this whole event after the fact as well. But in this environment, I'll be the designer, Brian will be the PM, and we'll be like adding a new feature, right? And we'll show kind of how that could go about. And then we'll look at commenting, collaboration, kind of repeatable components, then testing, version control, specifically, Brian, as we talk about legal approvals, especially the larger the enterprise and corporation, the more legal approvals you'll need. So that's something we want to talk about from a PM role. So as I shift here, if there are any questions, please feel free to drop those in the chat while I pull up the next reservation assistant here. Okay, and then this will be this. Perfect. Can everyone see the Voiceflow canvas, or at least Brian?
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm just shifting my screen around here for 1 second. Great. So this this content should look somewhat familiar here within Voiceflow, but we'll start down here at the bottom. Obviously, we had built out a very basic flow, and as you can see in the top right-hand corner, Brian's in here. Here's myself. So this would be a way a PM would collaborate really in a real-time collaboration. You know, you might have a developer in here, you might have a stakeholder at the same time, but you'd see where they're at on the canvas. So in this example, as Brian had talked about, this might be, you know, after the project brief has been sent, NLU data might be actually, you know, layered in on top of this, or, you know, imported to use in testing and to build out the interaction model. But let's say myself as a designer takes the more standard approach, and we go and we say, okay, we're going to use clickstream data. That's great. And through clickstream data, we know that there's 3 top intents, right? They're going to order online, they're going to make a reservation, and they're going to contact us, for example, right? So in this example, we're going to level, hi, Sam, here's some items that might be relevant, select one to get started. And then these are going to serve up as chips, right? So let's take a quick test here, right? We're going to click make a reservation. Okay, you want to make a reservation. What day? We'll say Tuesday. What time? You know, 2 p.m. Okay, great. You're looking for a reservation on Tuesday at 2 p.m. Here are a few options, right? And that's not overall a horrible experience, but we know it can be a lot better, right, Brian? As we talked about, what of this? Obviously, I even made this a step more complicated. What of this is you know, can be better? I think from a PM perspective, as we chatted about.
Yeah, I think like this is how we see in the industry design. And so as you start to think about like your horizons and where you want to go, how do you start to paint the picture? So maybe maybe this is the current design that we've had, right? We deployed this, we're using some type of data to inform the experience. And then now we have the ability to you know, surface more dynamically like we saw in the other experience. So a PM could come in here and make a comment or say, hey, we have this new integration, this new way of doing, you know, X, Y, and Z. And so maybe we should think more open-ended here and ask the customer, you know, what do you need help with? Or maybe we personalize the response like we saw in the second experience around you know, let's use the top output from whatever is surfacing, you know, providing that data. So obviously there's 3 outputs. If there's a high confidence that the first one is the highest priority, maybe we do a test. And do you want me to actually comment in here? Like,
yeah, that'd be good to show up.
So like maybe a PM could come in here and like you could post in here, right? Like different things there. Obviously the reservation thing could probably stay the same, but maybe in here, instead of the dates, there's a comment like new visual we can use here. I think, did my thing go away? So I think like it's obviously there's collaboration across the designers, because this is where the use cases come from. And so as we identify the use cases, we identify how we maybe present data in a different way. Maybe we port in different widgets, right? It's like the mixture of text and visuals in CUI. How do we start to, you know, paint that picture? And so some of the stuff we do here too is like, maybe we can't do this stuff today, but commenting on here and pushing the team to think a little differently, like I said earlier, helps us identify the gaps that we have in the experience and where we need to build new capabilities.
Absolutely. So then I think after obviously you can kind of collaborate in here, then a designer might obviously have already built this out, but come back in and say, okay, well, I'm actually now going to you know, go about rebuilding this and rethinking it. Obviously a lot more simple, In this environment, we haven't built it this way because we don't obviously have a clickstream API call. But here you could obviously put in, clickstream top intent, for example, right? As we talked about. Okay, so now that is being created. We are able to leverage that in a dynamic variable. So then we say, okay, because of these 3 clicks from the API, we know that this user is looking to make a reservation, right? And then instead we're listening for intent here. We've, in this example, I kept it simple, but you could nest this within various topics on the left-hand side and actually do intent scoping. So this intent is only available from this area within the project, which makes it a little bit easier to dynamically make sure you're filtering intents based on the actual intent that's being surfaced. As Brian mentioned, that can be a technical lift that needs some support there. But even here, right now we say, great, let me help you with that. Here are a few times to pick from. And here I dropped an image directly, but let's say you even wanted to do a dynamic image, then you could come in here and actually, create a variable, map something from a CMS based on the different times and the reservation availability that exist. Brian, as you mentioned, sometimes new images or new API calls to images are created or now a part of the bot ecosystem, and that's where you might tag and say, hey, use this instead, or look at what's new in your tool set, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and like I said, like this visual here, we are going through like, how do we start to add more visualizations to present data better instead of just bolding, numbers in a bot response? How do we make it a little easier for customers to understand, whatever they're asking about? And so creating some type of template that then ports in the data in a way that's easily scalable.
And I think that's a great point. And one thing that you can do that I find really helpful is even like a PM might work with a dev and designers up front to actually select like a lot of times this is API calls, right? For example, where you'd have like an API that's repeatable in here, and you'd select everything, and then you'd actually create a flow out of this, and then you'd call this, like reservation visuals, for example, because you use it so much. Well, then a designer can come in next time and just use the reservation visual flow forever because they know, okay, well, this is the same API call. I don't need to reproduce this every time. So just another thing to consider from like a PM perspective within Voiceflow while applying some of Brian's principles. I also wanted to show, we had talked about legal a bit. Brian, maybe I'll level that to you. Can you describe maybe like maybe a general PM workflow when it comes to approvals and what you're thinking about, specifically, legal and stakeholder approval?
Yeah, I mean, in my past life, everything that we built had to go through legal, compliance, risk, all different types of regulatory teams. And so the way we did that was through, sharing flows like this and expecting them to understand how all of this works together, share through email, and then have them kind of sign off through email and save that as an artifact. I think what's cool here within this canvas is the ability to share these flows in the way that Sam has it here, but also share the prototype so that these partners can actually interact with the customer experience and understand how it would present to the customer. And then also being able to allow them to collaborate, right, through comments or be able to sign. So you have sign off so that you have kind of a single source of truth with all of your different partners. Within the flow, you can, put comments and text and anything that you need, but you're not having to jump between different experience platforms and things, right? It's kind of like almost like I don't know, but where I'm going, but
yeah, no, I think, yeah, no, you said it very well, right? Where it's like, and when you say flow, you're talking more about like a static flow, right? Of like a static flow chart of like, hey, follow this logic A, B, 7, 4, all the way down, where this, even if you invited a legal stakeholder on Canvas, they could technically, interact from here. But some people might not have that technical lift where you can just share the here, look at how this carousel looks, look at how this dynamic image looks versus like, what does this API call render, right? That could even still be a question for non-technical users, right?
Yeah, and also some of the challenges are like if there's dynamic variables or dynamic experiences in the output, right? Like being able to talk with your partners around, we don't have everything, but we can show you examples, because you can't test everything based on the output, right? But you can share a couple of examples of how it would appear, and then know how all the examples would appear if necessary. But oftentimes when we would go to legal or compliance, it would really be just the happy path that we would have them sign off on. So, hey, we're building this new intent. We need you to sign off on the happy path. They didn't worry about any of the unhappy scenarios, because that content wasn't specific to things that needed to be, um, signed off by those parties.
That's a good point. And we've even seen people use versioning here. We've seen project managers use versioning where they actually save a version of a approved legal project and then call it production or live, right? So then that like this version was approved on this date. So like there's never any like question about, oh, did the canvas change? Because once that's approved, myself as the designer can actually go and continue to iterate on this project, make it better, optimize, while still knowing that whatever in production has been legally approved. And that's obviously a benefit for a PM in that part of their workflow. Cool. I know we saw some questions. Obviously, this is a kind of a flyby on the Voiceflow side of maybe how a PM might use it. So I'll stop sharing here and actually, Brian, pull you up full screen here to see if you don't mind answering a few questions before we wrap.
Yeah, I see a few in here. So Tara had asked how we define success for a bot experience and what are some qual and quant metrics that signal kind of what we look for. Yeah. I mean, there's the business unit teams have their own metrics that they kind of monitor because they drive the content and they own the content. What I look at from the product side is really on the highest level metrics. So adoption of the actual product itself into different experiences. So how many customers do we have using the digital assistant bot? But then within that, like what's our engagement? What's our interaction? What's the containment? Where can we start to challenge experiences and look at metrics to be able to remove the need to go to a human? So there are a lot of experiences at Intuit where we rely on humans. And so some of those things we're challenging is like, what if we experimented with a portion of the audience and positioned a bot, and there's specific metrics that come into play when you get into specific use cases like that. And then we do a lot of testing of our different prototypes. So we've done testing on hybrid experiences and full takeover experiences and traditional chatbot experiences. And we defined several metrics there in terms of like ease of use, usability, how much do you trust that this experience is actually helping you? So I would say it's more on the qualitative side when we go into those studies because it's one-to-one with customers. But those kind of drive, the principles and the guardrails and the experiences that we launch. Let's see, the second one, in your experience, how does a good team working in a conversational chatbot look? Not the ideal pro team, but a seed team to kickstart a project. Yeah, so this is a great question, Claudia, if you're still here. I see you're here. So in my previous role before joining Intuit, conversational AI was very new, and I was the only one doing this across 4 different aspects that we owned. So it was search, it was chat with a human, chat with a bot, and then our IVR. And there was a huge platform team, but there was nothing set up within the product lines. And so I would say really starting to dig into the space to learn it. That was what I did. And then starting to paint the picture of how much work is actually out there to be able to scale the team. So towards the end of my time there, we were actually scaling the team from me as a team of 1 to a team of 10. And I would hope that they did that because there was a lot of work there. So it was across like identifying new types of roles. So we need conversation designers. We need people that are looking and optimizing the experience once it deploys, because the conversation designer often doesn't have time to go and review the experience. They're kind of on this train of just deploying new content. And so having some type of analytics arm that can say, hey, we delivered this experience, and based on the success metrics that we've outlined, this is what we need. So a role like that, optimizing grammar as well. And then on the PM side, it was really around the focus on how do we start to scale these experiences. I think that's why we're seeing a lot of product management roles in the industry now, because a lot of companies have deployed these bots, especially during COVID. And now they're like, we have this bot that has 1 million people using it every week, and we need a PM to actually support that experience. So I happy to chat, Claudia, a little bit more outside of this if you want to reach out, and I can give you some tips there. Let's see, different, more complex challenges, gives examples of a strategy. How do you infuse personality into conversation design? TurboTax and MailChimp use different tone and voice based on their unique brand expression.
Wow.
Yes. So right now, all the content is driven by the product teams in the lines of business. So the teams that own, and Kenny Tan is my partner. He's on the line from the TurboTax group. So he is responsible for the tone and voice, the brand across all of our consumer group bots. So that would be TurboTax, Credit Karma, Mint, all of those. And so if you're talking like across all of the business units, we do have content standards and principles and guidelines and stuff that's there. But I think you really need to engage your marketing team to start with, like, what is that brand, especially if you want to give it a name, if you want to give it a true voice, because it shouldn't just be for the bot. If you really want to start to move into conversational AI, that type of tone and voice should surface up everywhere, because you should be designing everything with the mindset of conversation. So if you're in the IVR, if you're talking to the bot, if something's proactively opening to you, how do you carry that tone and voice? But we do leave it up to the product lines right now in terms of like how they want to deploy, what types of acknowledgements does the bot say? How does it carry tone? All of that. But we do want to move towards a path where we have a singular tone of voice across all of these business units.
Yeah.
I'm trying to see it. Keep me on time, Sam. I'll just keep rolling down.
Yeah.
Do you have any metrics about the conversational type of assistance, moving from informational and transactional to conversational? How do you measure these types of flows? Yeah, so I would say as you move towards, so with FAQs, it's like customer asked a question, they didn't call in within a certain amount of time, so they're contained. I think when you start to build out transactional flows, it's really around task completion. So of customers that actually started this flow with the bot, how many of them completed? So you're not really measuring containment. And then when you start to get into conversational AI, where customers can pick up and leave different types of experiences. If they start in the bot and they move to the IVR, does it continue there, right? And that, like, it's still a transactional experience, but if you're trying to complete a task in the digital assistant and you move to a different channel that can offer that, is there still task completion? And then it kind of gets into the sense of like attribution models that you see in like marketing, right? So within marketing campaigns, you're deploying stuff in search, you have digital ads, maybe you're still doing, TV spots, all of those things. But marketing used to do last touch attribution, where they would say the last thing that Brian saw is going to get is that product is going to get attributed to that. But then you'd start to take an attribution approach where you say all of these things work together, and even though Brian completed in the digital assistant, he still saw this proactive thing and he went, called in, and there was a bunch of different support working behind the scenes. So it's just a different way of measuring. But I'm not sure if that's been identified more broadly. Since to the point I made earlier, a lot of companies are just trying to get a bot on their site.
Yeah. Yep. And then, yeah, it looks like Samantha had a question there before we wrap up. I haven't not read that yet.
Yeah, 24/7 AI has a huge data science team, but back at the beginning of the year, they had a tiny conversation design team and no separate PMs. The data team would analyze the data for us, then report it to the conversation designer and the product manager, and it would be up to us to decide how to act on the information.
Wow.
Yeah, Yeah, I think that makes sense when it comes to content. I think what is great is to actually have data scientists that are monitoring the experience and seeing how things are being utilized in the bot, and then taking those insights and tweaking the conversation if you think it's necessary. I think where a PM can come into play is like, how do we start to scale? Especially if the conversation designers need backend system integrations and API calls and data, and visualizations and being able to hold context, like things that you need the bot to be able to do to scale your experiences from just being FAQ based, right? I think is where those insights can play. And so you can optimize the experience all you want. And then if you start to move into transactional, obviously there's back and forth system calls that need to be made. I think that's where you start to play there.
And just layering on top, I think that goes back to making sure that the real production NLU data gets back into the conversation designer's optimization, not just net new designs, but adding intents that are missing that continue to pop from the measurement the data science is doing. We don't have anything for this intent. It's very specific, and we're missing a big opportunity there. That's where you can really pair like the backend integration with like the optimization NLU flow as well.
Yeah, I've worked with data scientists on doing like monthly queries of top intents that they kind of roll it into intents or topics, but they say, hey, out of the 6,000 random sample that we pulled, these are top things that customers are asking about that we don't answer today. And so that kind of starts to prioritize the things that we want to build towards, because we only build what people are asking about. We don't build, that's my opinion. Anyone on the call can challenge that, but I think you should build for what people are asking about, not and what they need, versus build for what you think they need, because you don't want to waste time and build something that only 5 people are using a month. So 80% of your users should be driven, using 20% of your content. Everything else should be kind of out of scope, in my opinion. I do see one more question on here. When would you say that is time to scale from informational FAQ type bots into conversational transactional? I think that's up to you. I think it depends on the tech stack. There's a lot of dependencies there, but it doesn't hurt to start to prototype and provocate into a use case where you want the bot to help complete something for the customer. If you're a coffee shop and you want to build the ability for a customer to order a coffee, you can, right? It can be as simple as it doesn't have to do entity extraction and all of that crazy cool stuff. Like it could literally just be a customer enters in and you just go through a flow, like what type of coffee, what size, do you want flavor? Great, let me confirm. And then obviously you're going to have to send that to some type of system to be able to process their order. But I think starting to approach that space and like provocating in that space will help you understand the current state of your technology and what things might need to be prioritized. And I would say start early, because that would help teams complete that before you're ready to start to build, or you start getting asked to build those types of experiences.
Yeah, it's a great answer. Thank you for rapid firing all those. I think all these questions are spot on, and it shows that everyone's different on that horizon mapping right now. But regardless, everyone's thinking about what falls underneath each of those horizons for their team, for their tech stack, and it's not going to be one size fits all by any means, as you highlighted. So thank you for rapid fire and all those.
Yeah, you bet.
Before we wrap, I do want to give a quick shout out and plug for our next workshop. There were a lot of questions actually on ROI and measurement, and very excited to chat with Aisha Salim over at Instacart. She's the conversation design manager over there. She's actually going to talk about proving ROI, not only within your team and measuring bots, but then also like communicating that ROI to C-suite and beyond, because that's obviously a role of a conversation design manager. I'm sure project manager, as we talked about, does that as well. So that's going to be on September 1st. Stay tuned for registration details for that, but very excited to bring in Aisha and have that be the next follow-up workshop. But for today, for wrapping up, Brian, thank you so much for being here. This was incredibly helpful, and thank you for speaking tactically, specifically, and obviously based on your laundry list of experience. I think this definitely will help people, if at minimum, take one thing to apply today and what's next on the horizon for their team as well.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. This has been fun. I appreciate
Awesome.
it.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for chiming in, being active in the chat, and even at the top of the workshop, having some fun with us. So stay tuned for more of these workshops. Give Brian a follow on LinkedIn, and excited to do more of these. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. We'll talk soon.